So, welcome everyone. I hope you're all keeping safe and well. I would like to extend a very special welcome for all the UCLA alumni and AIA members who are joining us today. So, today I am very happy to introduce our very own Professor Willeke Vendrik, Director of the Coetzee Institute of Archaeology, Chair of the African Cultural Archaeology, and Professor of Egyptian Archaeology and Digital Humanities. She has been working in Egypt since 1994 at the ancient site of Berniki, and again from 2003 to 2011 at the Fayoum. In 2015, Professor Vendrik launched the Shiri Archaeological Project in Ethiopia, where she established valuable collaborations with the Ethiopian scholars and the community there. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Willeke Vendrik.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you have your pizza ready, and apologies that we can't provide you with one. Whenever people read where I'm working, they immediately get this sort of hobbit look in their eyes. Are you working in Shire? And if you look at the map of where we're working in Ethiopia, then you understand why they might think that. And we just tested this. Yes, there we go. So here's the map of Ethiopia on the Red Sea coast. This is the area where the UCLA project is working. Here's the location of the Shire. And you might be forgiven for having all these sort of Tolkien-like thoughts about this, because we have place names here like Gondar and the Bark. It all sounds very Middle Earth. Unfortunately, the site is not pronounced Shire. It's actually pronounced Shire. The modern name of it is Inda Selassie, and it's 60 kilometers west of quite a famous site, the site of Aksum. Aksum was a kingdom, a very powerful kingdom. And what its role is in relation to the rings, and here you have the rings, I will tell you further down in this talk. So the Aksumite kingdom existed from around 100 to 630 AD or CE. We have a whole row of names of kings. Most of these kings we only know from inscriptions or from their mention on coins. Some of them have left monuments, but others we really know very little about. And the Aksumite kingdom is famous for some of these monumental efforts. These are monolithic stelae in the form of buildings. You see this one has a door, it has windows, and these are markers on royal tombs in Aksum. To the left you see smaller ones for the earlier royal burials and also for non-royal elite. And in the right side you see one of those monoliths that collapsed probably immediately after it was erected. Now, if we look at Shire in relation to the Aksumite kingdom, then we see that basically everything is older. There is a little bit of overlap in the early Aksumite kingdom with the first kings of Aksum, but Shire really ends around 300 CE or AD. Now, everything before 300 BCE is called pre-Aksumite, and the period in between is called Proto-Aksumite. It's the period leading up to the Aksumite kingdom. The pre-Aksumite era then is everything before the 300 BC. Well, that's quite a lot of human history, I would say. So one of our tasks in Shire is to clarify what this Proto and pre-Aksumite period actually entails, and what is happening when we're outside this core area of the Aksumite kingdom. Well, just west of Aksum, there is this temple. It's the temple of Jeha, dated to the 7th century BCE. So this falls in the pre-Aksumite period, and it's the most famous pre-Aksumite monument. It is celebrated because it's still standing. It was used as a church, but it also has very clear evidence for contact with South Arabia. Here is the church, the monastery that is right next to the temple, and part of this monastery is built from blocks from the temple, especially these two blocks that are in the facade of the monastery. These represent ibexes, and these are pre-Aksumite reliefs. They are reminiscent of things that we know from South Arabia. This is the frieze from the Bahran temple, dated to the 5th century BCE, so later than the Jeha temple, in the kingdom of Saba in Yemen. And this element of ibexes and oryxes is a decorative motif that you find in South Arabia. And a long time, the argument was that South Arabia actually colonized Ethiopia. And there's still a lot of debate going on about that. But if we look at these animals, both ibexes and oryxes also occur on this side, so not the Arabian side, but the African side of the Red Sea. The Ethiopian ibex, the ibex wallia, is one of the very important symbols in Ethiopia, for instance, for its beer. We visited this winter the temple of Jeha, and in the monastery next door, farmers have brought things they found in the fields and also things that belong to the church and that are kept safe here. So here's a priest showing one of those beautiful decorated manuscripts. But there's also a lot of elements that were found in the fields, as I said. So on the left corner, the left bottom corner, you see a South Arabian inscription, ancient South Arabian. On the right, you see an offering table specifically for burning incense, decorated with a moon and a sun, or perhaps a half moon and a full moon, because the god worshipped in the temple of Jeha was a moon god. So what happened 60 kilometers west of there, further away from the center? So we have the Aksumite kingdom, this very important, very powerful kingdom that also had its influence in Sudan, present-day Sudan, but also into Egypt, because we found in Berenike, when I was working there, Aksumite pottery, Aksumite coins, and the pre-Aksumite center in Jeha. What was going on at that time to the west? So here is where UCLA has started a project 5 years ago. And just to show you a little bit of who was there this year, a lot of UCLA was there, actually. This is Vanessa Muros. She is our conservator. And a lot of archaeological work actually doesn't take place in the field while digging. A lot of it takes place afterwards, either in the labs at UCLA, or we bring the labs of UCLA into Ethiopia. So Vanessa left her lab at the Coatsen Institute and came with us to do the conservation and research on metals. Anneke Jansen, maybe you remember her. She was a postdoc at the Coatsen Institute, and she was doing our animal remains. Marianne Rageb, who you just saw, a graduate student at the Coatsen Institute, she came to get her fieldwork experience in Ethiopia. Iman Naji, a graduate student from the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures, joined us this year. Richard Erich, who is a graduate of the archaeology program at the Coates Institute and now has a position in China, is specialized in Chinese archaeology, but enjoys hanging out with us in Ethiopia. He has worked with us here for 2 years, and even though he officially didn't have time to come out, he just couldn't let his pots just sit in the ground, so he insisted on coming even for a short period to work on the material from his trench and continue the excavation in his trench. Gazmint Elezi was our pottery specialist this year, replacing Rachel Moy, who co-started up this project together with me. And even though Gazi is doing his PhD on Albanian ceramics, he got quite fascinated by the Ethiopian ceramics. There is this fundamental knowledge that you need as a ceramic specialist that translates to other parts of the world as well. One of the things that is clear from looking at the ceramics that we have a lot of very beat up small potsherds, but then all of a sudden we have very large sherds that actually come together and can be reconstructed into complete pots. And there doesn't seem to be a lot in between. So that's one of the riddles that Gazi is working on. This is Professor Annelou van Gijn from Leiden University in the Netherlands. She studies useware mostly on lithics and on ground stones to see what these lithics were used for. This is Arnoud Maurer, who is our botanist from Groningen University in the Netherlands, with 3 of our students. We have students from America, the one on the right, and from Ethiopia. We work together with 4 Ethiopian universities, and we have students and faculty from those universities working closely with us. And this is Stephen Goldstein, who is our lithics stone tool specialist. While Weia Li, who is a student from Professor Annelou van Gijn, is studying the grindstones. He has a special corner in the courtyard for his grindstones. This is not the amount of grinding stones we find. These stones we find in large quantities because they're also reused in buildings. So they're used for grinding, and they can be used for grinding different things. One of the things that Weia Li is doing is making 3D reconstructions of the grinding stones to look at the useware of the stones to determine whether they were used for grain, whether they were used for minerals. It could be used for metal production or for the creation of things for pigments, for instance, if you grind down stones for pigments. So he's doing the analysis of that. And the survey is directed by Matthew Curtis, who has a long-standing experience in working both in Ethiopia and in Eritrea, north of us. And he does the entire region where we work. It's a region of 100 square kilometers, 20 by 5 kilometers. And what is clear is that this region, which we knew nothing about, is extremely rich archaeologically. We found 4 large pre-Exumite to early Exumite sites. We found several rock shelters with deposits in them of earlier periods. We found 6 Middle Stone Age lithic scatters, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So there is decades of work just in this one area. And what it does, what it promises this region, is really to fill this gap that we have between the famous Exumite period and the early hominids that we have in the south of Ethiopia. All of these regions were lived in, they were used, we have the development of agriculture here, and it's all a big unknown. So everything we're doing is a huge contribution to not just the history of Ethiopia, but the history of humanity. Now, this is the photo, the satellite photo, just taken from Google Earth. You can go and look it up, of the sites in our research area there in the north. Mai Adrasja, Adja Ramira, and Mezaber Adi Menaber are just 3 of those settlements. And if you look at the landscape, you'll see that there are huge canyons going south of those sites. And these are little rivers that all end up in the Tekezi River. So all our settlements are founded at the start of these small rivers. There is a clear pattern that in the pre-Exumite period, this was the preferred place to build your settlements. And then the Tekezi River ends up in the Atbara River, ends up in the Nile River. So I can tell to my slightly worried Egyptologist colleagues that we are working at the sources of the Nile. The landscape of this area is gorgeous. Most of the sacred spaces, the churches, are built on top or near where there used to be ancient temples. And they all have copses of trees around them with these beautiful paths aligned with stone walls. The houses are built in compounds with each little round house having a particular surface. So one is the storage room, one is the kitchen, one is the living space, one is a bathroom. We have stables built like that. A lot of these use ancient stones. It's a reuse of older buildings. Now, we typically work in Ethiopia in the dry season, which starts around November and lasts through March. And then there's a rainy season. There's a tiny drier season in the summer, early summer, and then there's another wet season which runs through November. That's what we thought. But we started work here in mid-November because we waited until the harvest was off the fields. And as you saw, our trenches turned into mud pools because it rained in the dry season. Probably an effect of climate change. We are moving our work this year to January, February, if it's possible to go out and work, to hope to miss the rain of this season. Because, of course, if your trench ends up drenched like this, you can't really excavate a mud pool. So it really slowed down our work this year. Even though we built a roof on some of our trenches to protect them from the rain, it is very hard to shelter a trench in such a way that you don't make the problem worse than it is. Because, of course, all the rain that lands on the roof has to go somewhere. So we learned a lot about how not to build shelters, which will come in handy, as I will show towards the end of this talk. Just to show you a little bit of the history of the site, this is the site of Mai Adrasja in 2009. And you see green parts and sort of gray-brownish parts. The gray-brown parts are basically areas that have been destroyed. So here we are in 2009. This is 2014, and you see a huge expansion of the destroyed area. The reasons for destruction I'll talk about later. I just want to show you the landscape. So you see a river bed right here. That is where the river that runs into the Tekezi River starts. There's a copse of tree here, and there's a natural source here and a natural source up this way. You can see it a little bit better here. So this is actually where the water wells out of the ground. And in relief, that looks like this. So you see that the site looks out over the river. It's high up. In the black outline is the destroyed area. And the red squares are our first 3 trenches. We've now expanded the number of trenches. So I'll show you the map after this is turned around, so you have the same orientation, as you'll see in a moment on the map, with the river to the right and the trenches to the left in the area that's not yet destroyed. There we go. So that's trenches 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. 5 were excavated somewhere else, but 5 didn't result in anything. That was just a test trench. So I just want to show you some of the results of the last 5 years of excavation. We're not going very fast, but we excavate very carefully and we study everything that comes out of these excavations with care. We rent the land from the landowners, and you see that right under the surface, just under the plow line, there are the first walls coming up. So there's a huge depth of deposit here. We find a lot of complete objects, complete pots. Well, they're broken, but they can be easily reconstructed because everything is there. You see the difference in soil color from this trench. We have the brown soil on the left and the reddish soil on the right, because in this trench we have a lot of evidence for burning. And what that burning was doing here, probably different reasons. For one, we found these tiny crucibles, and they have remains of metal. And we have indications that there was actually metal smelting, not just melting and working, but actually smelting from ore at a household scale, which is completely unheard of in this area. So that explains maybe part of the burning. This is evidence from the Proto-Exumite period. But when we got deeper, there was more evidence of burning. And it seems that there actually was a fire in this area. If we look at the surface, there were large clumps of charcoal. And if we look at the surface from up top, you see this enormous chunk of wood. This really looks like a pole that supported the roof that collapsed as a result of burning. So this is a close-up of that log of wood. And we also found a lot of smashed storage pots. Again, large fragments of large sherds deposited in such a way that we could lift them as clusters. We could sort them out and reconstruct them into complete pots. A special find from this area also was this. This is part of an incense burner. Now, the dates in this trench are, as I said, Proto-Exumite, around 100 to 100 AD, going back to 300 BC. But then we dive into 8th century BC, and we go even earlier than that. So here we have a pre-Exumite incense burner. And it seems to be quite different than what is found in the Yeha area. We don't find evidence for Yemeni influence. We have a completely distinctive culture here. Now, if we jump to Trench 2, then same thing, just under the plow zone, we find our first walls. What really stands out is that under in a small area, a small depth of deposit, we have a lot of different phases. You also see here the bases of very large storage pots. These storage pots were sitting on this beautiful platform, and this platform was carefully planned. You see here 4 cornerstones that were embedded in a foundation of cobbles, and that foundation of cobbles was laid on a nicely stamped compacted floor. So here you see the compacted earth floor, the 4 cornerstones of the foundation. So the order of building was, you make your nicely stamped earth floor, you put in your 4 cornerstones where you want to build your platform, you put the cobbles around it, there was another layer of earth, and then you put the stones of the platform. So this was very carefully planned. Now, it seems unlikely that the platform was just built to hold storage pods. So presumably, before the platform was reused for these storage pods, it had another use, but we don't know exactly what that use was. For much later periods, we have examples of a platform that supports a big stone column to hold the roof of a cellar. This doesn't look the same. It looks quite different. So it's one of the things where the jury is still out, and we're looking for further evidence of what the exact use of this platform was. What you do see is that underneath the platform, we have another wall coming up. So again, face after face after face. In the corner, we found this pot, and this pot was there when the platform was built. But we couldn't remove the pot because we needed to see what it was sitting on. When was this pot exactly placed there? Well, continuing excavation, you see that we have under this platform a whole set of different walls. We have a kind of gutter here. And only here is where we could remove the pot. So the pot was sitting here and was temporary with, with this face. So if we look from the top, here is the face of this trench after the removal of the platform. And still, this is not the final face, not at all. This wall, for instance, sits here and clearly is of a later phase than these walls. Now, our purpose in this trench is to get a full overview of the stratigraphy of this site. So rather than keeping everything that we find, such as this beautiful platform, we have to remove it to go deeper. We do set those stones aside so that we can reconstruct these features, but the purpose is to go deeper. So we removed this wall that is now outlined in red as well. And in that wall, we found a very well-dated tip of a knife. And underneath that wall, we found what is either a dagger or a spear point. Well, this dates to before 1000 BCE. It is older, it's an older metal find than anything else found in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's extremely fine workmanship. And we're not at all at the bottom of what has been deposited here. It goes much deeper. So what we found so far is very early pre-Exumite remains that show metalworking at an early date, much earlier than anybody expected, and a huge promise for the future. This was also found, a very strange shape of pottery. And it actually is part of what probably can be characterized as a soul house, probably a religious item where it has an important symbolic meaning. Again, we know so little of this period, but there are parallels for these types of objects. Our Trench 3 gave us a glimpse onto a beautiful wall, very well built, and a large platform. When we continued excavation, we saw that that platform extended over this entire 5x5 area, but also inside the wall, we have a beautiful pavement. So when we removed that pavement inside, we had yet again an older wall coming up. This is from a 3D model that we made, and there's a little hole in here. That's not real, that's just a feature of the program. So here's the outside pavement. And when we removed that, we saw a really nicely stamped earthen floor with this little step here, well constructed. Again, an earlier phase. This is a view from the other side. And here's a view from this older wall coming up on the inside of the area. Here, the dates are also pre-Aksumite, pre-8th century BCE. And again, we're just at the top of excavations here. At the upper layers, we found a bronze coin. And as you see, there's a cross here. So this is an Aksumite coin, probably dating to the 5th or 6th century CE. But that was just in the upper layers where we have some Aksumite remains. Everything else there is pre-Aksumite. And this is just one example of some of the pottery found in this trench. Now, trench 4, we planned right here across this row of bushes, because the shape of those bushes was strange, and we wondered, how about if there were older walls underneath? Because in some of the robber holes that you see here and here, we found that the bushes actually covered walls. So we started with removing the bushes. These are stones right at the top, but these are the stones that the farmers throw out of their fields into the middle, in the edges between their fields. Immediately underneath that, a whole bunch of walls, but nothing where we expected them. We don't find these big walls underneath the bushes, so that theory is out of the door. What we did find, however, is again substantial building, and here is where we found those rings. Again, early metalworking. This is a little bit later, probably 5th century BCE. And this year they were carefully cleaned and studied and put back together. One is iron. And then we have 5 rings of copper alloy. It's unclear whether this is jewelry or has a more practical function, but it's not unthought of to have copper jewelry. And this is the trench. It was getting quite deep. So this year we decided to expand. Here you see Marianne again, to expand the trench to get a better overview of where those walls were going. Now, we didn't get very far in this trench, as you see. We basically scratched the surface. And I'll explain to you in the next trench how come. So we looked at trenches 1, 2, 3, and 4. Let's have a look at trench 6. Trench 6 is right at the edge of one of those destroyed areas. So to the right is the destroyed area, to the left is a tiny triangle that was not destroyed. This is not an ancient wall. This is a wall that we built to protect the actual ancient wall. So this is the ancient wall, a very substantial wall that goes around the corner here. And we started excavation. We found there early Aksumite remains, things that seem to be maybe earplugs, decorative things made of bone. These are seals. And they compare very differently to what we know of pre-Aksumite seals. This one was not found in Maya Drasha. This was found in Yeha. Out of context is one of those things that were brought to the priests to, sorry. And this sealing practice existed in the pre-Aksumite period as well as in the Aksumite period. for instance, in Trench 1, we found this pot, and it's very hard to see, but if you play with light, you see that this actually has a beautiful stamp with the same type of pattern that we have in those metal stamps and in some of the clay stamps, in clay seals. Now, the puzzling thing about this is, however, that these are ridges that stand up rather than are pressed in. So it's neither made by those clay stamps that I showed you, nor by those metal stamps. It is a pre-examite pot, but in the tradition of sealing that we know from the existing seals, but this is made in opposite way as the actual stamp seals that we found. So another little riddle that we hope to solve. So here are excavations going on in that trench. We found 2 giant stone blocks, probably bases for pillars, wooden pillars. And we decided to expand the trench in this direction. Because if you look in the profile, this is the corner of that room, but here we have a beautiful pavement of what looks like an interior courtyard. So here we started removing the bushes, removing the first surface, and as I said, there was just this triangle of land left between destruction here and destruction here. But halfway our season, we actually gained a wall. This wall was built while we were working here. And that was because this wall was built by one of the landowners of this land. This tiny triangle of land belongs to 3 people. And every year when we start excavating, we rent land from the landowners, from the farmers. And they tell us, yes, you can use my land, and we agree on a price. And these are lengthy conversations. So when we wanted to open a new trench, we had to restart the conversations with each landowner separately. When we found out that this tiny triangle was owned by 3 people, we thought, okay, that will last about 3 weeks to negotiate this out. Well, we only had 2 weeks to finish our excavations. So at that point, we simply gave up, and we hope to continue here next year. So this is the end of the excavations in this trench. It was the trench that was most near to the path where the children walked every day to school. So here you see children going to school. We actually had one person dedicated each day to wave at everybody passing by, because they were all waving at us, and it's very unfriendly to not acknowledge that. So here you see the guys waving at us. They also came to help. Well, as said, you saw this already. My Adresja in 2009, my Adresja in 2014. What made those holes? Well, this is the entire size of the site. This one has been destroyed now, which is about 80%. And those holes are made by people from not just the neighborhood, actually more from further afield, that are looking for gold. There are tiny flecks of gold, natural gold in the soil, and people are panning these out to make a bit of income. I talked to geologists, and they say this is not a gold-bearing area. There's other areas in the neighborhood that have a lot more gold. But somehow this combination of ancient remains and gold is very attractive. So these people are not digging for antiquities. They are trying to find gold, and they're really digging deep. So we've put a lot of effort in explaining why this is a problem. I mean, this is the site up here where you see those bushes. That is where the remains of the site are. This is the 80% that is destroyed. So we put a lot of emphasis in talking to people who live around the site, who live in the nearby city. We go to schools. And basically, the story is this. This is what you have in my Adresja. This is what you could have had. This is the Doemkool Palace in Aksum, which has been excavated. We have walls that are substantive. We have buildings that are enormous. We could have had things here very similar to the Dunkul Palace. But it's all destroyed now. And the Ethiopians with whom we work, people from the universities, but also people from the local community, people from the schools, they are extremely sad and angered about this. So we put a lot of effort in working together with the schools, inviting people over, explaining, going out to give lectures, creating leaflets and banners to go into the offices of all the different village councils around the area. And together we've developed a plan. We have now this enormous destroyed area that is basically of no use to anyone. You can't do agriculture on it. And when I talked to the local community, I asked them, what do you think should happen? What is something we can help you with? And they said, not we want a museum because we want to attract tourism, which is an answer that a lot of people tend to think is a good thing for a community, although it clearly has its problems as well. Instead, they said, we want our children to learn science and to learn computers. And at the schools we talked to, we said, what are the things you need most? And they said, well, we don't have a computer. Most schools don't even have electricity. We need to have good microscopes. And I thought, well, rather than doing this for one school, do these one-offs, it would be much better to think of this in a broader context. So we're developing a plan for the entire area where we would like to keep our excavations visible, because people know the name of Maya Drasha. Even the president of Tigray, the area where we work, has said, oh, this is very important. And then he came to visit and he said, where are the antiquities? Because he couldn't see anything, because we backfill every year and then the land is used for agriculture. So we would like to create an open air museum to show the excavations. And we would like to build a traditional village in which people could show the traditional techniques, but also show things, crafts that they're still doing, and sell the products there. We would like to reconstruct the landscape and also at some point in the future reconstruct some of the ancient buildings that we excavate. Also reconstruct the ancient landscape, because what we find in the excavation is that people were growing wheat and barley and lentils, and that may not sound surprising, but if you look at present-day agriculture in this region, people are growing teff, which is the national crop in Ethiopia, and millet and sorghum. So the landscape, the agricultural landscape has changed a lot. At the moment, people hold goats and sheep. What we find in the bones, what Anneke Jansen is finding, is predominantly cattle. So there are really different things going on in the past and in the present. Then in the museum, we really would like to marry this idea of archaeology as something that unites science. We do a lot of science, but we also make a lot of use of traditional knowledge. So this marriage of science and traditional knowledge is what should be reflected in this museum, which will explain what archaeology is, how we find out things, and will link that to well-equipped classrooms that is a science center for the local schools with 60 microscopes, 60 computers, well maintained, so that the schools can rotate in. And that's combined with an archaeological research center where children can actually come and see how this works in the archaeology. So this is a first raw sketch of the plan with the reconstruction of landscape, with a big tree in the middle, which is the center of the settlements in this part of Ethiopia. And this snaky blue line is actually a wall built of all the stones that are scattered through this entire area, based upon what now is a traditional way of organizing the landscape, with these beautifully dry stone walls. And these traditional houses, which are the compounds, which can then be used to demonstrate crafts of the region. Now, a lot of those houses use ancient stones, as I said before. So it's part of making use of the knowledge that exists, but also it's part of recreating understanding of the value of archaeology. Now, this project is not just something that we're doing in Ethiopia. This is a project that was done in the Netherlands by Leiden University, where the community built together and did research on the building techniques of an Iron Age house with original tools. So something like this we would also like to do for the reconstruction of the ancient buildings down the road. We're also asked to do a similar project in Italy. This is in Monte da Po, which is the ancient Italian site of Industria. It actually has a temple to Isis and to Serapis, two Egyptian gods, which were very popular in the Roman Empire. And this site was important and famous for its bronzes. So here we have a site in Ethiopia famous for its bronze, a site in Italy famous for its bronze, and in two sites, areas where it is very important to work closely with the local community. So that's what we're up to in Ethiopia, and that's what I hope we can continue this year in January. Thank you so much.